Well, I have the great pleasure now to introduce myself as the chair for the day and a very, very short session just before I hand over to Alastair. But we've got this bit at the end of the afternoon to talk around the state of the security profession. Quite a lot of interesting initiatives going on, particularly in the IISP, which we can talk around, and Alastair's got some slides to go through in relation to some of those, but the framework that's been talked about in the other stream, the charter application, so lots going on within the profession in general, in the IISP. What I wanted to talk about briefly though was, if I move forward a slide, the State of the Profession survey that we do every year now. I say every year, we've run it for 2 years and we'll carry on in the future running it. This has been published today. There's copies available from the IISP stand, and obviously ignoring the author's name on the front there, it's actually become a very useful piece of work that the IISP takes part in. It does include a number of other people that get involved in obviously producing the document, but fundamentally the views in that document are not ours, the board's, or my own. They are the views of the membership, and our membership spans different sectors, different industries, different levels of seniority, different lengths of experience, different academic backgrounds. So the spread of input that we get into the survey from that point of view is very useful, because it tells us, the board, what our members think, but also as members it gives you a view as to what the wider profession, in terms of the people working in the industry, thinks as well. So from that point of view, what are its uses? Well, I think if you're putting together a business case for investing in technology, in hiring people, in what sort of people to hire, the directions that trends are going in, this is a document which, as members, you've all got access to. It's available on the internet now, and it'll be publicised in the next day or so. But certainly if you want a hard copy, we've got a few on the IISP stand. What I don't want to do is what I did at the AGM and go through some of the key figures and key slides within it, but there's a few data points, a few aspects that I thought I'd touch on just briefly before I hand over to Alastair. So what did I find myself most interesting about the survey this year? Well, just to run through these in no particular order, the interesting one I thought was that there's a large proportion who feel that compared to previous years, or just in general, we're getting worse at detecting and dealing with incidents. There's quite a significant percentage of the profession, the industry, who feel that cybersecurity, the problem, is getting larger rather than smaller. And I think if you look at the prevalence and the scale of breaches that have happened in the last 12 months, in fact, since the survey data was collected, we've had the 1 billion user account Yahoo breach. So I think it'd be hard for any of us to say that the problem we're dealing with is getting smaller or is going away. But I don't think that should give us not sleepless nights, probably the wrong word. Perhaps it should give us sleepless nights. But it shouldn't be something we take as overly depressing, because there is also a recognition that although detecting incidents, detecting threats, detecting problems is a problem that is starting to get larger, our ability to deal with breaches was, or reacting, if you like, to threats that we encounter, was again widely reported as being something that is getting better, that is increasing. So there was a higher percentage of people this year thought we were getting better at responding to threats than before. And why is this? I think, to be honest, it might just be that we're getting more practice. As the different breach scenarios are fed through, different types of attack, different impacts, different severities, the things we learn from the Yahoos, the TalkTalks, the Sonys, the OPMs of this world, they all feed into that body of organisational knowledge we carry around with us, whether it's in Watson's head or our own. So there is some areas, I think, that we can take some comfort in. The other interesting question that we asked this time for the first year was what people's view of the worst breach was, from the point of view of the customers of the organisation itself, the management, and also the security team. And what that highlighted, and again, bearing in mind the timing, autumn last year, was unfortunately the winner in all of those four categories. If this was the Oscars now, somebody from PwC will be giving me the wrong company name, but the winner in all those four categories was TalkTalk. Now that I think is interesting for a couple of reasons. Anybody from TalkTalk in the room? Thank goodness. TalkTalk, of course, as breaches go in raw numbers, was not huge. I think 15,000 sets of financial details, 150,000 sets of records. Not massive. However, widely as a case study in how to handle breaches, how to handle the PR, the communications, the aftermath, I think we'd all agree there were some lessons to be learned. And certainly at the time the survey was conducted, that was obviously front of mind for most people. So that's an interesting fact because it's not a management of security issue, it's not a penetration testing, a technical issue, it's a PR, communications, softer marketing issue in terms of how you communicate the effects of that breach. And with GDPR, of course, that understanding is going to have to come more quickly because that 72-hour clock is ticking. So that was interesting. In terms of the industry more generally, the profession obviously is the people, the industry are the companies. It's widely regarded that the industry is growing, either growing or booming, depending on who you talk to. I think for the consultants and contractors, you can argue that growing and booming is the same thing. But the biggest challenge reported across the survey respondents wasn't process, it wasn't technology, it was people. And I think that covers those dimensions of board level understanding, user awareness, customer apathy around breaches and choosing good passwords, but also the training, professionalism, the number of resources and skilled people working in the industry. So people, out of people, process and technology were the biggest challenge. But again, to take some comfort from that, the salaries that people reported were high. If you look at national averages or other industries that we can be in, the earnings, the lucrative nature of the security industry was certainly one that came out in the survey. And that's borne out by the question we asked, again, which was new, around the reasons people either take jobs in security or why they leave them when they're unhappy. And the top two choices in both those two categories, reasons for taking a new position and reasons for leaving an existing one, were in second place remuneration. So money, I think, for most of us is a factor in what we do. But number one for both those two was the opportunities to progress, learn, develop, and develop and grow as professionals. And I think for those of us that employ security professionals or are building security teams or running penetration testing companies, I think that focus on allowing our individuals, teams to grow, learn, research, get certifications, develop their careers to the point where they can understand this wider challenging picture. I think that's a piece of information that from the survey certainly should be borne out in the management decisions that we all make. So that was all I was going to say about the survey. Obviously, a whole bunch of data points in there. Please do get hold of a copy, and if you want to use it in your own presentations, business cases, we're more than happy for people to cite it because it gets the IISP's name out there and the usefulness of the data persists. So with that, I'll hand over to Alastair, who's got several more slides than me.
About 40.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pearson. I really encourage you to look at this. It's some very interesting stuff. So thanks for moving things on. That's me. I realise that I'm probably the only one other than Pierce that hasn't got a trendy Twitter handle to my name, so I could be @Al or @Mac or something like that. But
well, the three-letter ones have gone, I think.
Sorry. Yes, everybody seemed to have those today. That's obviously the new thing if you're presenting. One thing today to save you from is the turmoil that is currently going on in the House of Parliament. You may have forgotten about all of that. You're not completely immune. I don't know whether you noticed the prescient sort of colour scheme of our various things, and it sort of struck me. I was sitting there thinking, we're the blue, the Conservatives. Quite today, having sat through most of today here, I think that there's a huge resemblance to George Osborne. Apologies for that.
Yeah, well, I'm not Red Ken at least. So.
And it's been a pretty sort of tame and conservative group of people in here. Whereas when I went into the stream one, everybody's in bright red T-shirts, and most of them have got beards. They're sort of younger and trendier, I suppose is a good way of putting it.
Well, thank you, Alastair.
I'm not sure about this. The amber lot. They're a bit more like the SNP actually, quite contrarian, a bit bullshit. And so anyway, I just
Can't
thought.
see Ian Glover as Jeremy Corbyn, though.
No, that's true. So anyway, as Piers said, there's only one thing standing between you and a drink, and that's us two at the front here. The other thing is, I'm surprised there's not a sort of a run for the hills at the topic, you know, the graveyard topic of the future of the profession, because I appreciate it's a bit of a solid subject. A number of people actually have approached me today to say, what's going on with Charter. You've probably heard me talk about that at the AGM, but I don't want to go into that. I think talking about it much more is going to bring us bad luck. But I think what is really important, and this is what a lot of people have been asking me today, is how do we relate to some of the profound things that are going on with government and what government is trying to do, which is a very, very interesting question. Now, I'm looking around this room and looking at a lot of people here that have been in the security business, probably nearly as long as I have. You probably, like me, all got into the security profession in a variety of different ways. Now, one thing that there's been a profound change on over the last 10, maybe 10 years, maybe a bit longer than that, is the growth of real cyber education. I mean, I came from a background of theoretical physics and diplomacy in the Foreign Office, and in a way, you know, we're called by scientists, which I am one, as being sort of natural selection in the hybrid vigor category, where you sort of mix different species together and or variants of species, and what you get out of it usually comes out well. And I like to think that some of us that were more founders in the profession than the young ones bought some of that vigour. We bought some level of discipline, I hope, structured thinking, but we were in a position where there were no rules, and we had to experiment, we had to test theories and put in place structures and standards that just simply didn't exist. I'm sure you remember the Orange Book days, or some of you will, at least. That's all changed. I mean, demand, you know, careful what you wish for. The growing awareness in the public, private sector, in academia to the challenges, most of which we've been hearing about today, have really changed the name of the game. The government's upped its ante, which is what I want to talk about, significantly in really being you know, very thoughtful around how do we get an academic pathway going? How do we actually train people to do what we want them to do in cyber? And more to the point, to respond to the inevitable questions from the commercial world and the private sector in particular, but also the public sector. Well, how do we get the skills and resources to combat the threat? So that's a hell of a challenge, and well, that's interesting. Not the right slide deck, but anyway, we'll talk around it. Not quite sure why. Amanda, have you any idea why that might be?
Get the other one in a couple of minutes. If you want to keep on talking.
Okay, I will talk about it. So I won't talk about that one because that talks about chartered status, which I didn't want to do. But this is really important. The government's decided that the scenario I've described, the sort of the history or the evolution of the professional career around InfoSec has got to change. By nature of the pressure they've been under, as I mentioned earlier. And so it probably hasn't escaped your notice that in November, the government came out with the National Cyber Security Strategy, which actually is their second attempt at this. You may not realise there was a former programme for national security, cyber security. But this one was more specific about addressing some of the issues that they could see really challenging the whole thinking behind putting in place adequate measures to protect the UK economy, to be the best place to do business because of our cyber awareness and preparedness. And so they came up with a whole range of things which are directly reflecting on what we as an institute are hoping to do. You know, they want to make sure that there's effective and clear entry routes into the profession. Particularly because one of the issues that they have across government and equally across the private sector is the lack of diversity, and by the way, the lack of younger people that are really in this business, and I'll explain more about that in a moment. They want to make sure that cyber security is taught effectively and is an integral part of the education system. Now I mention that because they have done a pretty good job, they being the government, in encouraging the universities to run cyber programs. And if you remember, just 5, 6, 7 years ago, that was largely focused on cultivating research. And then, of course, you had MSc programs starting to pop up. And the whole demand was starting to fuel the interest of many students to do more than just computer science or to move from other disciplines into this particular area as a specialism. So it was a big change, and so they have really started that ball rolling. But some of the pressure from the universities has been, or pressure on the universities, the challenges is that they haven't been getting fertile resources, i.e. younger people, to move into that educational pathway. And so the universities have set up these degree programs, MSc research programs, at the disadvantage of not having a really good stream of people priming the pumps, if you like.
Yes.
So the other thing that really interested me about this whole thing was that sorry.
Which one would you like, Alastair?
I like the second one, this one. That's
Okay.
it. Yeah, that. So I'm there. Okay. So the other thing that really interested us as an institute is that in 3 cases in the National Cyber Strategy, the government talked about the need to set up and establish a body that is going to be the professional body that defines the profession, sets the standards and maintains those standards. We'll come on to that in a moment, but that's exciting for us because that's sort of what we've been arrogantly thinking internally that we sort of do, but they weren't actually being any more specific than that comment. And then you know, the whole concept of cyber knowledge, building cyber knowledge as an integral part of professional development, and that's not just with the profession, but people that are analogous to the profession. So other teachers teaching foundational stuff, it's other courses, business studies and so on, teaching the risks, threats and aspects of cyber that they need to. And then of course self-interest, the government wants to make sure that they're okay. So I mentioned that this has not, that last year's strategy, November's strategy, wasn't the first. This is a bit of an eye chart, but this was from the Cabinet Office talking about the National Cyber Security Programme that was kicked off in 2012 and did a whole number of things. They were trying to increase the pipeline, that's 4.1 if you can't read it. They wanted to make sure there was a sustainable supply of people. That's something we want to do as well. 4.3 was make sure that cybersecurity knowledge is part of the day job for relevant cybersecurity professionals across all sectors of government and non-government. And then they wanted to put good management and governance in place. That was prescient for setting up the NCSC, the National Cyber Security Centre, I believe. And they also wanted to get the UK recognised as not only being a fantastic place for cyber research, but also a very good place to run your business if you are that way inclined. UK is a safe place to do business. That was the ultimate goal. You can see from the colour code, and this is them rating themselves as to how well they've done. They've done a hell of a lot of these things, and they've done it pretty well. But it hasn't solved the problem. So if you look, and the problem's actually more than is on this chart. This doesn't tell the whole story, but it tells where we're heading. One of the things on here you'll see, and this is possibly the first time there's ever been really detailed research on numbers of cyber security people, or infosec people, whatever the flavour. And they're talking about, at the moment, there being 68,000 of people that are embedded in the, that could be called professional, embedded in the business. And then one thing that surprised me, they're talking about a further 1 million individuals that are also involved or employed in alongside the so-called cyber security professionals. Now, they did a lot of work over the last 3-4 months in validating these numbers on the basis that they actually needed, for the first time, to stop talking about there is a skills gap shortage and start talking about what that shortage might be. And then they also projected what the numbers should look like by 2020, which doesn't sound huge to me, but it's actually looking at the data very similar to what we're seeing the US government saying is in ratio terms of their existing to future cyber requirement. So one of the problems with these numbers is they don't, as I said, don't tell the whole story. Now, if I added on these numbers at the top, that 35% of the security professionals that are included in the 68,000 are retiring within the next 10 years or at retirement age within the next 10 years. And another important point is that the significant churn of government employees is such, of government employees moving out of government, partly because of cuts and challenges of doing work, doing what they're asked to do, are moving out into the commercial world. That may be because they're able to attract higher salaries because of the interest in their particular skills. So there's a bit of a revolving door with government people, and that's putting further pressure on government's numbers around the whole cyber security issue. There are other factors. There's the impact of HMRC's wonderful IR35, which is causing a load of people to drift out of contracting jobs and moving, in some cases, to other disciplines, but hopefully staying in the security profession. And then, of course, there is the challenge of students not really knowing what employers wanting, and so not actually electing to go on the lower end of the pipe on the pathway to education. So it's a bit of a mix, and in fairness to the government, they want to do something about it. and are looking to do something about it. So they've said, and this has been in public sort of Chatham House discussions, they've said the government, in their cyber skills strategy, which is a separate document to the national cyber strategy, they said they want to do this. They have said that the challenges, the secondary education's inefficient in terms of provision of cyber skills. A lot of youngsters that come out of sixth form don't have the foundational STEM skills to move on to many of the degree programs teaching cyber, which is a surprise. Then there's a big issue with STEM itself, in that people that are wanting to be cyber security professionals don't necessarily want to link that with studying STEM subjects. So there hasn't been sort of joined up thinking about how you make it attractive. Then the other thing is, as I said before, there's incredibly low diversity. Do you realise that the diversity in security, in InfoSec and cyber security, is lower than any other technology discipline, less than 10%. And I mean diversity in the broadest sense. So that's a real problem. And so there's, to add to those problems, there's limited capacity, there's not many providers, not many people that design educational courses, there's inadequate numbers of teachers, lecturers and researchers, and there's poor career advice. So achieving this by 2020 is one hell of a job for government, and for those of us that are sort of peripherally involved, like the Institute, something that we need to focus on so that we can see if we can help. One of the things that they have come up with very clearly and actually sought our advice on, they have said there is a drastic need for professionalisation in this business. So some in government call us, and this may upset you, but they call us an occupation rather than a profession. Some in government would argue that the business that we're in, the occupation we're in, is too fragmented, it's very fast moving, and they argue that in such an environment it would be very hard to pin it down and say we can make a profession of it. Now, I disagree with that. I think that somebody's got to bite the bullet, and okay, it's incredibly complicated with multidisciplinary activities that are quite distinct from each other. But so is the medical profession, or so it was before they called it a profession. And that's what we need to help achieve. And one of the key foundational elements of the need for professionalisation is that somebody actually defines what the profession is all about. And so you've probably heard a number of people, particularly if you're been to institute meetings, about talking about the common body of knowledge, or a body of knowledge. And if you wonder, if you've never seen one of those, it accurately defines the disciplines within the profession. And therefore, from that, you can start defining or creating educational programs to say, well, we want pen testers, so this is what they must look like. Here are the skills, here's the experience we need. And that might be radically different from a security architect or a security analyst. They are radically different, but they're not different from the concept that I mentioned that medicine has had to go through. The difference between an orthopedic surgeon, a hematology specialist, and so on, so on. So there's a lot to be done around that area. The other thing which I know gets some of our board members and some of our members quite exercised is that I don't think security should be a graduate profession. What we are all about as an institute, if you remember, is about assessing skills and capability through experience, basically. And that's actually what a lot of really good other professions do. Again, in the medical profession, to use that analogy, you don't get to consultant just by having a load of certificates. You get to consultant because you have proven skills and ability. And we're in the business of proving skills and ability, or at least assessing those skills and ability. The other thing is that to be professionals, we need pretty good frameworks and standards. Well, we have our skills framework too, and we're building standards in terms of knowledge base. And we're trying to implement standards around codes of good practice and ethics. And we're hoping that they will help us in our charge to be chartered status. There's also the other problem that we're not alone, the Institute, I mean. And the government recognise that there are many, many organisations, and they don't understand those other organisations, and nor does industry either. It's very hard for an employer to work out when somebody has a list of certifications. Amongst that maybe a master's degree from Royal Holloway, but a list of other things. What is relevant? How do you cope with the non-standard and the complexity of the whole educational system leading up to people getting the right knowledge? So that's a challenge. But the government's turned round and said, well, there is a need for professionalisation. And their response is rather simplistic. They said, as you saw in that National Cybersecurity Strategy commentary, there's need for consistency in the profession. I've just been talking about that. And a body of knowledge. So they agree with us that the body of knowledge is so important. They also comment that the immaturity of the security profession means that the industry, or the immaturity and the lack of structure and the lack of consistency means that the industry, i.e. the people that need the skills that we have, aren't really clear about what to get, why to get it, how much to get, and so on. And so there are no guidelines. And that's an area that we could help with. That's an area we can move into, talking about what it takes to build security teams, what a CISO actually means in an organisation, and so on. And all of these things really hinder the business or the professionalism going forward. So there is a desperate need for a professional body. So we've responded to this through meetings and consultation that, our vision hasn't changed. And one thing that it's worth prompting the government thinking about this, that's DCMS, Cabinet Office, GCHQ, quite regularly, is that we've actually been doing many of those things, setting standards, accrediting people against standards. We have code of practice, albeit fairly embryonic, and we've got embryonic ethics that we want to put in place. But we are trying to drive standardization in the industry, and have succeeded. And we've been doing it now for damn nearly 11 years. And so I've made it very clear to them that we need to go beyond what we want to do, just changing the institute into a chartered institute, or somebody that's eligible for charter. We actually need to move on and say, but what else can we do? And there are clearly a lot of challenges for us, but some of the things that we can do are up here in terms of serving as a representative body and trying to draw all of the other threads together, BCS, Institute, the IET, for example. There are many organisations that are doing great things, but we don't really have a really good dialogue to make that happen. They're looking for an organisation to build a sort of coalition of stakeholders. We're seen as possibly one of the strongest stakeholders, most pure play, with real focused interests. I'm not sure they'll let us do that. I'm just saying that we have the opportunity to be in that place. We are trying to define a framework for cybersecurity and establish those standards and policies, and we're going to continue to do that. And it's interesting that a lot of our corporate clients have got great expectations that we'll continue to do that and actually do more of it, and that they can use what we produce. So that's really helping us with both corporates and to some extent with government. And then we are already helping the final point, which is establishing core criteria. We're assessing more and more courses under the great direction of Amanda and the team. But we need to do a lot more to really make a mark. So there's a lot of challenges for us ahead. I don't think, despite the government's focus on professional bodies, that professionalism is just having a professional body. And I've been arguing that whilst that's one point, actually they need, the government, what they need to do now is to really assess more effectively what the workforce really should look like in all of its dimensions. They should work with those that want to think about it, the educational pathway. That's the academics, that's everything from the academic universities through the schools that are interested in cyber, through organisations that are creating the national occupational standards, and out into the commercial world for people that are creating really good cyber relevant courses. And then the government also needs to look at the issues around diversity and engagement, because that's possibly the weakest area of government thinking at the moment. And it's not just diversity in the normal sense, but also neurological diversity. People that are brilliant at cyber, many of them in the hacking team next door, but aren't very good at doing academic programs, of which there is a high proportion, I believe. So that's the challenge that we face for the future. And at that point, I will shut up. So thank you. That was a bit of a race, and apologies for the slide mess up, which was just sent to try us. Thank you. Thanks for listening.